Hi, welcome to Game Changer. I'm your host, Zakiya Mabry. Today, we're going to be talking about inclusive leadership. We have a very special guest, Juliet Burke. She is Deloitte. Deloitte is one of my former colleagues, and so I'm very excited. I met Juliet when I was giving a presentation for OPM, and she came up. There was a long line of people waiting to talk with me about my presentation, and she came up and said, "Hi, Zakiya, I'm Juliet, and I just wanted to give you some feedback. I'm a partner with the firm." I'm thinking, "Oh no, what does she have to say?" But it was pleasant. Good feedback, and so I was very pleasant to happy to get to know her over the time when I was with Deloitte, and she is a leader in talking about leadership. She's written so many articles, she's written a book, and she's known around the globe about her insights on inclusive leadership and bias. So welcome, Juliet, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I remember exactly when I was talking to you. I'm sorry if I gave you anxiety about that, but I do remember talking to you after your fabulous presentation.
No, it wasn't anxiety. I was very happy that you took the time of your day to talk to me. That was wonderful. So you've spoken to influence so many people around the globe, like I said, about leadership. Can you I just gave a little bit about your background. Can you go a little more deeper? I know you've been working in the field of human capital for about 20 years. Can you tell a little more for the people who are watching this LinkedIn Live right now about your background before we get started?
Oh, yeah, sure, I will. Well, actually, I started life as a criminal lawyer, as a district attorney, because I have a very
Oh,
strong social justice bent. And I was a criminal lawyer for about 5 years, and then I was a human rights lawyer for another 5 years. And then from that, I started a boutique consulting firm with a professor of psychology when we were looking at diversity and inclusion. And I think this was at a time when people didn't look maybe so much at diversity and inclusion. That was in 2000. And I have stayed looking at it and thinking about it and researching it, first of all, in my own business, and then now with Deloitte. And then, well, I'm leaving Deloitte on the 31st of September. So there'll be a new chapter. I don't know what that's going to be. But this is very important to me, I think, as a person. I think it's important to us as humans, and I think it's vital to our workplaces.
absolutely. What does diversity in business and leadership mean to you?
I think what I've come to understand about diversity is that it is all of the things that make up who we are. And there are those things which are visible to people. I mean, we look at you and me and we see different racial backgrounds, we see same gender, we see age. Well, I'm not going to go there, but we look at the things that are superficial. But there are so many other things that are below the waterline that you can't see. You know, our educational backgrounds, our family experiences, our sexuality, maybe whether we have a disability or not. All of those things go to make us up, who we are. And actually the intersection of those things. So it's not just about the fact that we see each other as two women. You're a black woman, I'm a white woman. That's a very different experience. So I think diversity is all of those things. And all of those things go to make up how we think about the world. And that's actually, for me, the most important part of diversity. It's not just the demography, it's not just what we look like. We want to have a workplace in which, of course, we have a full representation of people in terms of their demographic differences. But the reason why is because we want to bring lots of different ways of solving problems to this complex world that we're in. And no greater complexity do we have right now than COVID-19. How do we manage that? How do we change our workplaces? How do we change our cultures? How do we change the broader political environment? We need everyone to help us do that. And that's really what I think diversity is in the end. It's the way that we bring those different understandings together. So your second question was around leadership. What does that mean for leadership? I think what it means is that, well, two things. I think leaders need to be inclusive of all of this diversity. And so that means they need to change, but also they need to create the environment in which within their organizations and outside their organizations, diversity is seen as the most critical asset. You can't do your job. You can't be a thriving organization if you are not on top of diversity. You cannot ignore diversity anymore.
Excellent points, Juliet. Thank you for that. And you touched on intersectionality. As you mentioned, most organizations today are touching the surface about diversity and inclusion programs and have strategies, but how there's more important about recognizing intersectionality and have people having a sense of belonging. That's the next progressive step. For those who are not familiar with intersectionality, because as I talk throughout my talks with individuals, they're like, well, what's intersectionality? Can you go a little deeper in explaining what intersectionality is? Because a lot of people are not familiar. I know you just touched on it in your previous answer, but can you go a little deeper with that?
Yeah, and let me give a bit of background on that, because I think intersectionality actually comes out of a whole lot of feeling amongst the Black community that when women in particular were talking about feminism, that they weren't incorporating their experience as well. So, great work that's been done on feminism, but the view was that feminist voice was very white. And Black women were saying, my experience is actually qualitatively different. Sorry, let me say that again, qualitatively different to yours. It's not just white plus sort of white woman plus Black woman. It's not like that. It's actually those things together, an experience of being a Black woman, as you know. Why am I telling you this? It is qualitatively different. If you have other aspects of intersectionality as well, if you layer into that what it's like to be have a disability, or what it's like to be non-binary, so you layer multiple things together, or age. So even if you think about white, white plus disability is a very different experience to just white, right? And so it's the layering together. Right. So instead of saying that it's, additive, it's actually a different experience. Well, you tell me, I should have paused. What would you say?
No, right on. You're right on. Thank you. No, yes. For example, I like to call myself a triple threat because I'm African American, I'm a woman, and I have multiple disabilities. So yes, marginalized population. So therefore, that's like my intersectionality, because yes, I'm a Black woman with multiple disabilities. Those are all still part of my identities. And yes, that's what I would say it is. Yes.
Yeah, that's
Thank
it, right?
you for that.
So I think what's important, if I can just build onto it. Do you mind if I build onto it?
Oh, no, please do.
That has a material effect in the workplace, because if you look, for example, at pay equity issues, there isn't just a pay equity issue, sort of male and female, Black and white, Asian and non-Asian. Then every time you layer in another element, the pay distance becomes larger. So the more, if you say you have African American plus disability plus gender, we're stretching it out, so that there becomes a sort of ranking there. It's quite interesting in a way. The sort of the male female, then you get the sort of male female Black and white. Then you get the male female Black white and disability. Male, female, Black, white, sexuality. So intersectionality has a material impact on how the workplace is experienced, but at the bottom line, pay.
Right, right. Absolutely. Thank you for painting that picture because I know I'm a visual learner. So those analogies and how you put that out, I'm pretty sure is helping a lot of our listeners. And to that point, if anyone who's watching this, if you have questions or comments, please drop them down in the comment. And I know that a lot of people signed up, over 500 people. So if you would just put in the comment area, where are you viewing from? Just put if it's a different country, put where that is, and put also what your role is. Because as we talk about being an inclusive leader, you could be an inclusive leader, but right now your position is not in a leadership role. Let me repeat that again. You can be an inclusive leader, but you're not yet in a leadership role. Some of you guys will understand that a little bit more in our discussion. Now I'm going to go to the next question. You did an amazing TEDx talk. If you guys haven't seen it, you're going to have to Google it when we finish with this LinkedIn Live because there's so many golden nuggets in that talk. How to be smarter and make better choices. You talk about a lot of different things, but one of the things I would like to mention right now is when you're talking about groupthink and you're talking about decision making. And one of the quotes I have here is when you're talking about the problems with non-decision making teams is that they tend to all share the same point of view. You asserted if you all solving problems from one perspective, you're all building in an error rate of about 30%. So it's really important to have diversity of thinking. Can you please explain to our viewers what similarity attractive bias is and why does it matter to leaders and managers?
Okay. So similarity attraction bias, sometimes it's called homophily. Maybe we should say mini me syndrome, but it's the idea that we are attracted to people who we feel are similar to us. And that feeling of similarity can be for many reasons. It could be for status, educational background. It could be the suburb that you live in. But all of us tend to sort of lean in a little bit closer, faster to people whom we perceive as similar to us. And we give them the gift of little favors, little kindnesses. For example, information, what's going on in the workplace. A little tip. Hey, you might want to apply for this promotion. Time. Let's go and have a coffee together. And so that feeling of similarity is actually creating just one more advantage for the person who is similar to you. And in fact, it's very easy in some ways to overcome similarity attraction bias. And that is that you actually have to spend time with people whom you at first perceive as different, because the more that you spend time with them, the more that they will humanize and you will find that point of commonality. There was a really great study that was done in the US. I think it was after World War II. There were two studies that were done, actually. One was in the black housing projects, where they had a whole lot of white people starting to live in those complexes. And the white folk afterwards were saying, oh, these people, they're so nice. I really like them. Well, of course you do. They're just people. But it wasn't until they had that human connection that they could see the different points of, community between them, different points of commonality. And so therefore what you're doing is you're widening the scope of people whom you will give those acts of favor, who you will give the acts of kindness, of time, of attention. So rather than it being at a superficial level, you're doing it broadly. And that's what people in the workplace, as you rightly said, Zakiya, everyone is a leader in the workplace. Everyone leads, everyone is being looked at by someone else. And so everyone has this opportunity to say, I'm not just going to be superficial with those people I was originally attracted to. I'm going to stay a little bit longer. So let me give you an example of that. So, sometimes you're at a dinner party or a barbecue and you're standing next to someone and you're thinking, oh my God, I have nothing in common with this person. And you just want to walk away, right? You feel like the conversation is boring. But sometimes you get trapped. And actually, when you get trapped, the more you talk to the person, the more you find, actually, we did have something in common. And you stay talking to that person for half an hour, right? And that's actually the thing that we're talking about here. Not just the superficial attraction, but stay longer with different people until you find a point of commonality.
Yes, yes, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. And I would challenge our viewers to do that. Maybe once a week, have, if we're social distancing now, but maybe have a sidebar conversation with a colleague that you normally would not converse with. And when we're going back to work in the cafeteria, converse with a colleague that you normally would not, because you never know what information that person um, would have. I know in the Deloitte culture, it's very on your network, because that's very helpful in um, contracts. And when you're off a contract, you never know who's to help you get on another contract. It's the same when you're not in the culture. You never know who can help you when you're navigating this professional realm. So it's also very good to continue to do that as a tip when you're not in the consulting world. So that's just a little tip that I will just throw out there. Um, to really drive this home, can you please, for those who are taking notes, let's talk about diversity of thought. Why is diversity of thought so important and crucial, especially in a time like this?
Yeah. Thank you for asking me that. And I think, look, it has been a bit of a vexed issue talking about diversity of thought in the United States, because there are some people who believe that if you talk about diversity of thinking, you're not talking about those fundamental issues around sexual identity or gender or differences in sort of racial groupings. That couldn't be further from the truth. Those things are really important to make sure that there is, a level playing field within an organization from which you can draw diversity of thinking. And when my research was showing that diversity of thinking, there are sort of 6 different ways that people think about problems. Some people are very option oriented. They have lots of different solutions. I know Andrew, who works with you, very options oriented. He'll have lots of different solutions to things. Some people are very people oriented. They're focused on the person and stakeholders and how people feel. Other people are very process oriented. And the fact is that we need all 6 to get to 100% solution, 100% accuracy. So those 6 are, some people are very outcomes oriented, options oriented, risk, process, evidence, and people. And when the research that I was doing was showing that if you don't have those 6, then you have a gap in your ability. There's like a blank spot, right? If this is 100%, there's something missing here. That something missing, as you said, you are likely to make a mistake 30% of the time if you have people around you who see the world just like you do, right? So, and that comes from Professor Scott Page's research out of Michigan University. On the other hand, you want to make sure that you innovate, right? That you're actually doing things bigger and better, not just curing mistakes, but you actually want to improve, right? Go up. And when you have diversity of thinking, if you have these 6 different ways of thinking about things, you can improve the quality of the solution that you came up with by about 20%. So if we add 30 and 20, 50% is contributed to by diversity of thinking. Now, the question is, where then does, for example, racial diversity fit into it, or gender diversity? As I said, we need a level playing field to make sure that we've got everyone in the organization. But there are 2 additional benefits that we have when we have gender diversity and racial diversity in particular. And let me just speak to racial diversity now, because I know that that is a very sensitive matter, not only in the United States right now, but in the UK, in France, to some degree in Australia. If you have an environment in which you have people whom you perceive as culturally different to you, you look at them and you think that they humans are so basic. We look at someone, we think they're culturally different, but we do that. Then what you tend to do as a human is that you tend to think that they might know something that you don't know. So when you have groups of people who look different to each other, we tend to sort of slow down the communications. We tend to ask more questions. We tend to listen a bit more closely to what that person is saying. Now, I know some people think, no, we don't. What happens is that the people who are different get shut down. I'm not denying that that does happen, but if you do it enough times, you see this pattern occurring, that there is a little bit more listening when someone is different. Now, some people might be experiencing this right now with me. If they're not Australian and they're listening to my voice, they might think, well, she knows something that I don't know because maybe she's a bit different. But it could be true, Zakiya, that you know exactly what I know. But if it comes out of my mouth, we tend to just listen a little bit more closely. And that's one of the reasons that we need racial diversity in our workforces, because it helps us to listen to people. So not only do we have the raw content, people do see the world differently, but it has a behavioral effect. It influences how we process information. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense to me. But let me get to the questions, to see what questions that we have for everyone. One moment.
Yours didn't capture all of them, but here's the first question right here.
Okay. Oli Contos from the Department of Education says, wow, very impressive. Thank you for having this done in the D&I space from everything from saying. I would say it's great insight. Juliet, how do you recommend that we build bridges with people who don't have previously dedicated attention to D&I issues?
So I'm just going to play that question back to you because, obviously you're recording this from the US to Australia. There's a bit of a time lag. So the question was asked, how do we build bridges to people that haven't had a lot of time thinking about diversity and inclusion? Is that right? How do we take them on the journey?
Yes, let me repeat it. How do you recommend we build bridges with people who do not have previously dedicated attention to D&I issues? Yes, I guess people who don't have a lot of previous exposure to D&I issues. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I think the starting point is probably all of us at one stage didn't have exposure to diversity and inclusion issues. Whether you go back to your childhood or whether you go back to something in the workplace, there was a moment where all of us were not sensitized to diversity and inclusion issues. And so I think that's a good starting point because it means we don't go with judgment to other people. People become very alienated when they think you are judging them. I know something and you don't know something and you're bad because you don't know something. I think we have to be gentle, right? And assume goodness in others. And then in terms of practicality, I think I would assume as well that it's also about exposure. People just haven't had the information or the context or the way of thinking about it. And so I think then gently, without judgment, talking to people about, you might not have had this experience, but here's my experience in the world. And then asking them a question, what's your experience? Because everyone has had, and I used to do this a lot when I did some workplace activity. I would assume that everyone in their life has had a diversity experience in there somewhere, but maybe it's not the way that I'm thinking about it. And so I would ask them, tell me a time when you, and this is a great tip, tell me a time when you noticed an assumption being made about someone else, or as an assumption that was made about you. Don't use the word stereotypes, just talk about assumptions. Okay. When did you experience or witness an assumption? And people will talk about, oh, I was at school and I saw those children weren't talked to, or I lived on the wrong side of the tracks and I told them where I came from. They were like, oh, yeah, you know. So asking them about their experiences and then inviting them, well, you know, lots of people have experiences like that. Would you like to explore that a bit further? I think you have to ask people to invite people into a conversation, not just tell them stuff. So I'm going to summarize those. I think you go with a mindset of non-judgment. Everyone starts at some point. Secondly, find out something, assume they do know something, right? It may not be as much as you do, but assume something, which means asking them, you know, what assumptions or assumptions have you noticed or experienced yourself? And then thirdly, inviting them into a conversation. It's probably a two-way conversation. You know, can we talk about this a bit more? I could learn from you. You could learn from me. And one thing I heard about yesterday, which I really, really love, is this idea of empathy circles, where you're actually in workplaces starting up a conversation in which we empathetically learn from other people. Whites learn from blacks, Asians learn from non-Asians, people with a disability and non-disability learn from each other. You know, let's just find that humanity between us. I'm hoping that gives some practical advice.
Thank you so much. And I've known Oli for over a decade. He's a really wonderful guy. Hold on, some more. Shelly is tuning in from PA. She's a disability resource manager. Joni is tuning in from VA, outreach manager. We have Pierre is tuning in from Manassas. Mark is tuning in from Australia. He's been on the show before. We have David. He says, I believe travel is so important in opening people to other opening up people to other people. Yes, I believe that too. I grew up in a military family. I grew up overseas in Germany. So I believe that exposure early on in life is what gave me the appreciation to other cultures. I didn't move back to the United States until 9th grade. So I grew up my formative years in Europe. So I too believe traveling is very important. Maria, hey Maria. Dr. Horn, hey. We're just saying hello to everyone that's up here, and thank you so much for tuning in. And we're going to have another break shortly and look at some of the questions. Oh, hey, Mark, how do we incorporate my experience into the solutions that focus on community impact? How do we incorporate my experience that the solutions into community impact? That's this question.
I'm not sure I understand that question. I don't have enough context.
Can you read it? I don't understand the question.
Yeah. So okay. How do we incorporate the I and my experience into the we solution that focus on community impact?
Do you mind just if Mark
how do we incorporate the I?
Yeah, I just can't get the sense of that.
The I and my experience into the we solution that focuses on community impact.
I'm gonna take the I and the we part because I'm not sure about the community impact bit, but let me take that. I think that because I do think that it is important that each of us feel like we have a voice in the solution, and therefore that we feel like we're being heard, that the we is not just this sort of, I don't know, point of view out there that everyone else is making up, and my experience is not there. I don't think that we ever feel that my unique experience is fully known to a we, right? It can, everyone is unique, but to a degree, we want to feel that our voice is represented somewhere, and that voice can be, visually represented. When we look at people in positions of authority, or we look at community action groups, we want to know that our voice is there. But I think more than that, we want to feel that that person is articulating an understanding of us and has gone through a process of listening. If we feel that we were not even in that consultation process, then we feel that the solution that was created is a solution that actually what we do think is that solution is not going to be right. Because if we feel like our voice is not represented in the solution, we think, well, the solution is going to work for 90% of you, but it's not going to work for me. So I think partly it's recognizing we will never fully be into the we in terms of a representative voice, because everyone is unique. We just want to get to, a majority position. But secondly, being part of that conversation with someone so that they, it's an interactive, it's a give and take, isn't it? So that when a solution is developed, or when a public position is developed, that you see yourself there. I think that's one of the challenges at the moment when we look at leaders, political leaders or organizational leaders. They're talking about us as a nation, us as a workforce, and we feel like, do you actually understand where I'm coming from here? Do I hear my language? Do I hear my stories? Do I hear the visuals? So I see the visuals representing me? I think we're just looking for thin slices to show that I am represented in the we. And I don't know if I've really caught the answer there. And if I haven't, Mark, please tell me in the chat and I'll re-answer it again. But let me know if I'm on track with what you were thinking.
Thanks so much for that answer. And I'm encouraging everyone who's watching this, please just hit like so that this can be shown on your timeline, so that this information can help somebody else. Just hit the like button, because then it'll populate on your timeline. Going to the next question, how do you think today's leaders can do better to develop minorities in roles of executive leadership?
I think, and let me say, first of all, it is a C-suite responsibility. I do think that leaders now cannot be leaders in this day and age, and now I am talking about senior leaders, if they don't engage with the conversation around diversity. Leaders lead diverse workforces. They work in diverse markets. They need diversity of thinking to deal with complex problems. You can't not engage. But I think what happens is that leaders sometimes feel nervous about it. They feel that they don't have all of the answers, because that isn't something that they've thought about beforehand. I mean, I think we've discussed this in a couple of different questions. And so, the onus then is on leaders to lean into and say, I don't have all of the answers. And actually, that's called humility. That's called learning. We all don't have the answers to everything, right? So first of all, an attitude of humility. I can learn from other people. And I think when people hear a leader being humble, it gets into your own heart a little bit, doesn't it? It's much easier to fight a leader who's, I know all the answers, and well, no, you don't. But if a leader is humble and says, well, I could learn, teach me, then we're prepared to be generous towards them. So the first part is humility. And then the second part is to say, actually, this is really important. Even if I'm going to make mistakes, I have to have this on my executive agenda. I have to have the answers to how many people are we promoting? How many people are we recruiting? How many people are we letting go? Let's talk about pay equity. This is information that needs to come to my desk. It can't be to someone's desk who is buried in HR, right? It is a C-suite conversation. And I, as the leader, am ultimately responsible for that conversation. So even if it's hard, even if I don't know all the answers, even if we're imperfect, tell me about it. And then that leader to be talking to other leaders to say, let's get together around this. This is something that we have to solve. We have some power here, and it's our responsibility. We are accountable. In 2020, we are the leaders of 2020. We are accountable for the solutions. So I think there's multiple things that leaders can do, but it starts with vulnerability. It starts with saying, I don't have all of the answers, but I want to be better at this.
Thank you for that answer. And part of your answer made me think about the article that you wrote with the Harvard Business Review. And you have outlined those 6 points. And one of them, number 2, was humility. But I just want to quickly just go through them. When it's talking about inclusive leadership, you have to be visible to commitment, articulate commitment to diversity, challenge the status quo. Number 1, yes, challenge the status quo. One of the things in the federal government is bureaucracy. One of the reasons why I left the federal government, why are we always doing it this way? Oh, that's the way it's always been done. Okay, but we're always doing it this way, but is it effective? No, not really. Is it cost saving? But that's the way it's always been done. Okay, so you have to be willing to challenge the status quo. Number 2, be humility. They are modest about their capabilities. They admit mistakes, just like what you just said. And this to me was so important. They create space for others. That's so important. There's so many leaders today who just like, I'm here, and they sometimes like actually push other people down. They don't want other people to grow. And to me, the sign of a great leader is they're making space for someone else. This is awesome what you wrote. And they're aware of their own biases. That to me, we're going back to emotional intelligence. They're very in tune with their emotional intelligence level and their curiosity about others. You stated this earlier in our conversation. Their cultural intelligence. You talked about that today. They collaborate and they empower others and they pay attention to diversity of thinking. This was a very impactful article that you wrote in the Harvard Business Review. And I, again, encourage people to look it up and start trying to implement some of these practices if you're not doing it. This no time like the other to start implementing some of these skills in a time like now when we're going through an economic crisis, COVID-19, and we're having racial unjust going on. It has to affect your employees. So I just had to talk about your article because I really thought it was excellent.
Thank you. And I want a shout out here, if you don't mind. So that article I wrote with Dr. Andrea Esposito. So she and I were the co-authors on that, and I've been working with her for a couple of years. And it built off the work that I did with Bernadette Dillon a few years ago. So this is always a collaboration. You know, it takes a village to come up with something this helpful, I suppose. And I've definitely, had great people working with me.
Well, the big shout outs to them. And that goes back to what my comment was earlier. Your network, you have to have a strong network of people to help you be successful and do impactful work. So an article by the Washington Post claims that, I'm sorry, is there another question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, one. And everyone, please like this live, please.
Galen is on here. Maurice is on here.
Okay.
But let's see.
Hi, Galen. Hi, Maurice.
Back here. Let's see. I think this was
Hi, Shelly. Joni, for the many years of tolerance was presented as a solution for inequality. Tolerance is occupying the same space, pretending to accept others as opposed to authentic communication. If your company is not diverse, look within for the solution. Yes, that's an excellent point, Joni.
Cyril, the next one. Cyril was the next question.
Okay. Cyril says, how do we break down the walls of those who don't want to change? Change takes time, and change management, if you know anything about change management, that's is very slow. But I will yield that question to Juliet. How do you break down the walls of those who don't want to change?
Well, I think once again, we have to look into ourselves, right? What are the things when we don't want to change, when we don't want to eat healthily, when we don't want to do exercise, when we don't, there are lots of things we don't want to change about ourselves. And what are the things that help influence us? For some people, it's facts and figures. For other people, it's stories. For someone else, it's listening to a person in influence. There are many things that change us. And it's the same lens when you're trying to help someone else. Sometimes you can't help that person. It has to be someone else who influences them. Sometimes it has to be an article that they read, or a story, or a movie, or, as you said before, Zakiya, you go overseas and you have a sort of lived experience elsewhere. But I think change is personal, and therefore the strategy to change the individual is personal. And you can't just tell people you need to change, because that doesn't work with us. I've never changed because someone's told me to do that. I have to, take it on. So I think once again, you look at yourself. How are you influenced to change? And then you think about all those different ways, and they're the ones that you use to work with other people.
Absolutely. And I would just add to that, it's just like weight loss. Some of us struggle with weight loss, and some people will tell you this method, they try that method. And it's maybe on the right trainer that works for you. And they might have said some of the similar things that other people have said, but it's just, you maybe vibe with that one person, and that person may be effective to you. Or if you're a person of faith, you may have heard the same type of sermon be preached before, and it never worked for you until you heard that one person or a message, and then it hit home for you. And the person may be thinking, well, I've preached the same message to you before, but why is it working for you then? It's just, it was delivered by that person for somebody to hit home for you. So it depends on the person and how it's delivered. It's just, that's just how it is. So the bottom line is, it's a continuous process, and just have lots of education and just do it all the time. A lot of things that I've noticed since I've been doing this type of work, a lot of organizations want to have D&I session training, just like a little Band-Aid, and like, okay, we did check the box, we did our diversity training. It does not work like that. It has to be continuous all the time in order for you to start seeing the results of the training. I mean, the results, the culture change. I think we'll have one more question, and then we're going to go to the next question. David Roswell has, in the terms of the strife and the violence related to the diversity that gather all the attention, how do we make organizational equity issues relevant?
Well, I think it is. I think even though it's terrible, what's been happening is that the conversation has been elevated to the C-suite. And so organizations seeing that they are actually a social enterprise, that organization sits within a community. And so what's been happening outside of organizations has now been brought into them. Organizations have to have a position around marriage equality. They have to have a position around Black Lives Matter. They have to have a position around Me Too. You can't just ignore, like, that's happening to the community, because the community are your customers. The communities are your suppliers. The community is your workers. And that's how you bring the inside, the outside in. You're not an island. It's not an organization. That's the person who's buying your product. That's the person who's advocating for your product. That's the person who's working. I think it's bringing it in multiple ways into an organization to say, you are just one organization, part of a broader swimming pool of organizations and community. And, actually there's no difference between the two domains.
Great answer. And I think it's really good that the organization sends out memos, and also have town halls and do check-ins with the employees after something happens, just to see if your employees are okay. And I know when I was with the firm that Deloitte did that. And so I would encourage other organizations to do the same thing. If there's something that's impacting the world, to check on your employees to see okay, and then also have services available such as employee assistance program, where if they're not okay, there's a resource to reach out to and utilize.
I think actually that's a really good
so
point.
In your book,
yeah,
which two heads are better than one?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just think you were raising a really good point, and that is that one thing that I have seen in good organizations is that the organization is a safe space to have these difficult conversations. Sometimes when people go back out into their homes or their communities, or the sort of broader world, it feels tense, whereas you've got to work with people next to you. So sometimes there's a safe space, and I think organizations can own that, to say, let's have a safe space conversation to talk about difficult issues. There's no judgment here. We all have to get along. We can provide you, as you said, with extra support around it, but let's own the feelings that this is creating, the anxiety, the uncertainty, particularly during COVID. People feel very anxious. This is a health pandemic, so it's people's well-being. And in addition to that, you've got protests. You've got a political election that's kind of people are campaigning for in the background. So the workplace can be the site to really bring people together, rather than saying, oh, that's something someone else will do. I think workplaces have this ownership of social enterprise. Very important way of thinking about themselves. Sorry, you were going to ask me something.
Very, very true. Oh, no, I'm glad you brought that up. That's very, very true. Thank you. I was going to ask you about your book. Which two heads are better than one? How teams create a breakthrough ideas and make smarter decisions. How can you talk to us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, thank you for asking, because I'm actually in the midst of rewriting parts of it with my team for a new edition that's going to come out at the end of this year. And that was a book in which I was trying to bring together all of these ideas around how, diversity of thinking, of demographic diversity, actually makes a difference to the way that people make solutions. And so it's a very research-heavy book. It's very thick, but it's got these basic ideas in it, which is that we really need to change the conversation to talk about diversity of thinking. That doesn't mean that we're leaving the other things behind. It means that's the direction. When we have a really diverse environment, it helps us to get to diversity of thinking. If you have a group of people that all seem the same, chances are they're all going to think the same. Just a chance, right? Just chances are there. So let's talk about, we're doing this so that we have, of course, representation, but to create better outcomes for our community. And then I talk as well about inclusive leadership in there. You've just talked about that. We've got 2 HBR articles actually, so if people Google them, they'd be able to find stuff on inclusive leadership. What does it mean to be an inclusive leader? And how do you lead inclusively this diverse group? Because that's the complexity, right? It's much easier to lead people who are very similar to yourself. They don't actually need that much love and attention in a way. They just sort of, whatever you do works for them. But people who are very different, that's the onus is on all of us to create these small circles of people who are different to us and create harmony within those circles. And that's a skill that we often haven't been taught. So thank you for asking about the book. I know it's a bit hard to get in the US, but if you go onto the Australian Institute of Company Directors, then you can get the book on that website, AICD. That's one of the places. It is supposed to be on Amazon, but I know it's hard for people to find.
Okay, we'll put it in the link when we finish. Our next question we have are: what are your thoughts on the C-suite auditing, the hiring practices, the promotion, the talent development plans of senior management, and review engagement surveys, and especially the exit surveys, which I believe is crucial because that tells you, the reason why people are actually leaving your organization after you spent some money on bringing them on board, to pinpoint unconscious bias and to find out what is actually going on. Is there any bias going on? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I do. I do think that there has to be a reporting up to the C-suite and actually the board as well. I think that boards are interested because boards are at risk. So there is a job to be done by someone who is the chief diversity officer reporting into, or the chief diversity officer reporting into the CEO, or the CPO, or CHRO, the chief human resources officer, or the chief people officer, putting that onto the table for people. But yes, I do think that there has to be some metrics: who's getting recruited, who's getting promoted, who's getting exited, pay. These are, the top level data. And secondly, for the C-suite to say, this is not good enough, that we must have 50-50 if it's gender. There must be 50-50. That's the community that we're working in. Let's work towards that. So I think these are C-suite conversations, and there does have to be, just the same as any other business metric, what's our profit and loss? Where's our risk? These are profit and loss issues. Yes. These are risk issues. They're just hidden in the guise of being human. This is what being human is all about. It's all about diversity and inclusion. How can you talk about human-centered design if you don't talk about diversity and inclusion?
Thank you. We're almost finished with our questions. Information, I definitely know, gets filtered as it goes up the chain of command. Senior leaders have a much rosier picture of the view of the employee experience than the bottom, due to middle managers. In your experience, how do you address this issue?
It's an issue for everyone, that everyone is in their bubble, right? And senior leaders are in their bubble, middle managers are in their bubble. Actually, employees are probably in their bubble as well. They're not really hearing what's going on up the line. So I think, it's about having skip meetings so that you stay connected. It's about senior leaders actually sitting with people, and having sort of just listening sessions, empathy circles with people who are across the organization, not always having the information filtered. It's about leaders. Previously, we would have sat in cafeterias so that you're making sure that you're sitting with different people. But one leader that I was talking to the other day, and it sort of goes back to that original conversation that you said when I came up to you and was talking to you, and you're thinking, what is she going to say? But this leader, what he does is he rings people randomly throughout the organization, and they're thinking, oh my goodness, why is this senior leader? But he's saying, I'm just having a random telephone conversation. I just want to know, how are you going? And I think leaders have to do that. They have to find their ability to reach out and then listen to other people. And probably in the same way, people who are at different levels in the organization want to find their connections in. So they might not understand. Maybe a senior leader has made a decision and they just haven't heard enough about it. So I think we need sort of more matrices, a matrix of connections. But it's definitely important for senior leaders to stay connected and to do that deliberately. Because, the challenge is when you're a senior leader, no one wants to tell you the bad stuff. No one wants to tell you. So it's so hard to get feedback, really hard. So I'm always grateful. If someone really truth tells to me, I am so grateful for them for being brave and telling me how it is, because I'm in my own little bubble as well. So you'd probably be surprised how much people appreciate really getting in touch with what's happening.
Wow, thank you. I'm pretty sure people really appreciate hearing that out there. Let me just go back real quick to check to see if there are any questions.
Yep.
Okay. Mark said, is there a risk in the time of crisis like now when employers should be shedding staff to the first to go are the people who are different? Is there a risk?
Well, that's a great. Well, and I think I mentioned to you
Okay.
that I'm one of the people who's been made redundant from Deloitte, and that is starting on the 30th. And I do know that when Deloitte did that, though, it's actually a commercial decision. You know, the area, the business that I was working in, you know, wasn't doing as well. But they did do an analysis of things like gender, you know, who's working part-time, who's working full-time, you know, looking at it from a racial context. So I do think he's absolutely right. There is a risk that those people who are more marginalized or who are different will in fact experience redundancy more than others. And therefore it is very important for organizations when they've got their list of people who are going to be made redundant to have a look at it through that lens. Otherwise, that is exactly what will happen. The people who have less power are the people who will be made redundant first. So it's a very, very important question. And I don't have any hesitation in the decision that I've been through. It wasn't coloured, I think, in ways that looked at sort of different demographic difference.
Oh. And Joni says many companies employ HR and personnel who have lack of D&I investment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is, we just, and Brian says diversity for the company's growth can be leveraged. Where is it? For actual growth. It helps the company as well as the minorities if done correctly. And yeah, that's the key right there, if done correctly. And that's it right there. If everybody would just hit like, and I just want to share, I appreciate all of your insights, Juliet. And just a little bit about me, I was in high school that I was not college material because I was in special education. And that really hurt me. I was told that I, should maybe go to trade school or something. And, college wasn't in my foresight. And I had my parents as my advocates, and I went to college, have a bachelor's degree, now have master's degrees, and I see myself getting a PhD. But I say all that to say, Deloitte is one of the hardest organizations to get into. And I applied once. They flew me all the way from Georgia to DC, and I applied and I got in. And so I just want to say to anyone who's watching this live is don't ever let anybody tell you no, that you cannot do something. If you put your mind to it, you can achieve anything. And I personally believe that Deloitte is an organization that is full of the most driven, intelligent, problem-solving individuals around. To me, it was like coming from the federal government. I thought I was bad. I really did, because where I was working, I can do PowerPoints, and people always were coming to me to solve problems and to do a lot of different things. And I was used to the culture. But to me, it was like being MVP of your high school ball team and then going to the major leagues. And I was just like, oh, wow. Everybody around me was like next level genius. That's kind of how I felt when I walked into the doors of Deloitte. So I just say that to say, don't ever let no determine you or let anyone say you cannot do something, and persevering and keep pressing on, because you can do anything that you put your mind to. And I really appreciate Juliet and
look what you've done with this, with your webcast. This is fantastic. Kudos to you that you have created this webcast and you've got 500 people who are following you. This is kudos to you. Well done.
Thank you so much, Juliet. And thank you for your global leadership that you have done. Like I said, people have been in my inbox for the last couple of days, not wanting to miss it, saying they had engagements, but can they get the replay? They didn't want to miss you. So I just really appreciate all the work you have done throughout your career. And I did not even know you were an attorney. You're so humble. And that's one of the things I appreciate about you. So are there any final thoughts, and is there anything exciting that you would like to share with us that you're going to be doing in 2020?
Oh, I suppose so. The exciting thing for me is that I'm going to try and finish my PhD. So I have 12 months to go, and I'm looking at interpersonal inclusion. So, what are the little things that people do that make someone who's their peer feel included? So if you ask me back next year, I'll tell you my results from my PhD.
Okay, and then you have to be back on the program again, please. Please back. Um,
Well,
with that, I just want to say I'm going to have my first masterclass where I'm going to be talking about tips that I have learned along the way using my authentic voice and inclusive leadership. And that's going to be August 26th. And you guys can sign up by going to the thriveclass.com. And thank you, Juliet, again. And thank you all of you for tuning in. This has been Zakiya Mabry. Don't to like and share. Peace, love, be safe out there, and many blessings. Thank you so much.
2, 1.